couple hours behind you guys. My name is Megan Lundstrom. I am one of the co-founders and director of research at the Avery Center. We are based here in Colorado, but we serve across North America currently. I am a survivor of domestic sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. I have my undergrad is in finance and my master's is in sociology. And together I like to refer to them as phenology, because that's really where I frame a lot of my perspective on this issue. And then I have been doing direct services since 2014. And just recently over this last year transitioned into research. So I'm very passionate about evidence-based and survivor-directed programming and intervention and prevention efforts.
And we love Megan. We got connected because we're both also doing business initiatives and we were sharing stories. And then she has talked to the women of Rethreaded multiple times about and taken her finance course, which is awesome and transforming lives. And I love it. All right, Stephanie.
Find my mute button. So my name is Stephanie and I am a part of the business development team at Rethreaded. I am a survivor of sex exploitation. I have been with Rethreaded for 3 years and I get the honor and the privilege of educating community and working with our community and just sharing the facts about human trafficking. And so I also work with women directly coming out of the life in a mentorship role and persons coming out of drug and alcohol addiction. So I'm really excited.
And Stephanie is like a force of good in the world. Like she helps so many women on their path to freedom. And she is so full of love and grit. And I love working with you. Okay, Erin.
Yeah, so my name is Erin Pruett and I'm a licensed mental health therapist in the state of Florida, so here. And for the past about 10 years, I've been working in a variety of ways really in the anti-trafficking movement. And then 4 years ago, had the honor and privilege to start at Rethreaded, and that is where I'm still at today. And my role really at Rethreaded is to address all the clinical needs of the survivors, and then through that to provide individual and the group therapy piece. But really what I say I'm most passionate about is ensuring that survivors have access to excellent clinical services and that programs are really following the best practices as they grow and develop. And so I'm honored to be here with so many amazing people, both on the panel and in the chat, that are just doing their part.
Okay, so these are our amazing panelists. So how this is going to work, we're going to start each section with kind of a poll, and you'll be able to answer the poll by clicking on your button from your computer. And the poll kind of addresses, it's going to be an educational tool for us. So we are going to start with the first poll that we're going to start with. And hopefully I do this better than the timing. Okay, so the first poll is, what percentage of cases of human trafficking are related to a person being abducted and kidnapped into the trade? 5%, 18%, 37%, or 64%. So if you can go ahead and put your answer in. This is so fun to watch. Okay. Okay, we're going to end polling. So 39% put 18%, 37% of you all, 14%. So the correct answer is 5%. And I love, usually no one gets this answer right. So I love that the education of this is being put through our community. Okay, I need to get out of point. So in reality, only about 5% of human trafficking cases are abduction. The other cases are the use of force, fraud, or coercion to perform a sex act so a person can make profit. And this is very different than what the media teaches. This is very different than what movies portray, usually books portray. So what we're trying to do is paint a picture of what it really is and how force, fraud, and coercion is used to make a person enter into the life. But before we start, I want Erin to kind of walk us through a little bit, like, since we all come with like preconceived notions of what this is, like, how can we be open to learning something different?
Yeah, that's such an amazing place to start, Kristin. And I think really to be open to learning, I think it takes a shifting within ourselves first, and then also within society. So for me, the openness to learn expands when we become curious and we're shifting out of this I know position, which at times means that we have to shift towards this place of living in a countercultural way, because so much of our world comes from this I know position rather than this curiosity approach. So for me, learning occurs as we really like listen more and we explore the barriers within ourselves and then also externally, which keep us from that openness. I think that if one has an assumption that they already know, they might just be less likely to engage in the learning process as a whole. Or this can play out as well, that if they've been told they're bad if they don't know, it might keep them from that curiosity and the willingness to engage or change. So really, I think we're truly moving towards openness to learn when we're engaging in curiosity, we're walking in humility, we're landing in permission, and we're committing to a willingness to shift the perspectives that we've carried sometimes throughout our entire lives.
Whew, that's good. And that's some work.
Totally. So much work.
Okay. So we're going to approach this with curiosity. We're going to have a time for questions. And we're going to give our experts time to answer these questions. So I'm going to direct this to Stephanie and Megan first. Can you help us understand the grooming process to enter the life? How have you experienced, or how have you seen traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to exploit vulnerability? Can you guys kind of speak into that?
Yeah. And so, I love what Erin was saying about like our fixed mindset and needing to get to a place of like willingness and open-minded to learn, because even like for myself and having experienced exploitation, I still didn't fully understand what had happened. And there was like a lot of self-blame in that. And so my experience with force, fraud, and coercion and the grooming process looked a little bit different from what I thought human trafficking was. And so it kind of went in a fraud, coercion, force order. I had become homeless and I, suffered from drug and alcohol addiction. And I ran into a person, my trafficker, in a place that I was unfamiliar with, but he was familiar. And so he was like, I'll protect you, right? Like, this is a dangerous place for you to be. These are dangerous circumstances. He says, I'll protect you. And so I trusted this person. And when I went with him, it had the drug and alcohol addiction, and he was able to feed that. And then he also knew my son's father. And so he would kind of hang that over my head at a lot of different times when I was feeling like I need to get out of here and I need to go somewhere. And then, when I would try to, that's when I began to experience the force. And that's when I began to experience the violence. So I was fraudulently brought in. I was coerced with drugs and alcohol. And then, the threat of my family being told. And then, whenever I wanted to leave, that was just not an option. And he would follow me around the city. And that's my experience with that. Megan?
Thank you for that, Stephanie. I think, and as most survivors, when we share and learn from each other, it seems like even though maybe the details of our experiences are different, we can identify so much with one another's stories and just that process. So I have a couple thoughts. I've written down some notes here on this. Like, what does this look like? And what we've seen in our research is something that we refer to as the perfect storm. And so oftentimes we think of entering a trafficking experience as this like one-time event. It's one thing. But the reality is it's a culmination of vulnerabilities and experiences, particularly within marginalized populations, whether that's gender or sexuality, or living in poverty, or experiencing substance use disorder, all of those things. It's kind of just creates this perfect storm. And a trafficker is usually enters prior to that actual moment of exploitation. And they're kind of just watching this storm brewing, and they're oftentimes helping facilitate the brewing of this storm. And so when that vulnerable person finds themselves kind of in, their back is against the wall, they're cornered, they're out of options, that is the moment that a trafficker steps in with this solution. So that perfect storm, again, like it can look different for each person, but ultimately when you kind of zoom out, you're seeing these patterns of lots of things are happening, lots of things are adding up. Where my research has really focused is on something I refer to as cultic theory. And this came out of wanting to understand my own experiences under pimp control, which is just one form of third-party trafficker. And pimp control trafficking specifically meets all 15 characteristics of a cultic group. And then through my research and in talking with survivors of other forms of third-party control, you start to see these same like common themes again that come out of how traffickers operate. So no matter how they present on the outside, whether it's a family member or a friend or an intimate partner or an employer, they're using the same tactics and they're creating this same environment. And so when we think about an environment, Rebecca Bender taught me this analogy years ago, and I just absolutely love it. You think about a frog being put into a pot of boiling water. So if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out because its system knows that this is a dangerous environment and it must exit as quickly as possible to stay alive. However, if you put a frog in a pot of just room temperature water and you slowly increase the heat over time, the frog's body adjusts to those temperature changes slowly. And so by the time it's too hot for that frog to survive in that environment anymore, its system is starting to shut down and it actually will cook to death. And so when you think about trafficking, again, it's not this one-time incident. It's this gradual turning up of the heat. So that's vulnerabilities, grooming, pushing boundaries, to the point that once somebody recognizes what is happening, that this is not safe, that this is scary, that this is dangerous, that I want out, that individual is oftentimes so entangled in those circumstances, in that environment, that it's incredibly difficult to break free from it. So those are just a few of the frameworks that we use that I have come to understand my own experiences, but I've also seen, again, these common themes across individuals who have shared stories with me and with the Avery Center.
I mean, when I'm listening to you guys both speak, there's this like really weird perception in our culture of choice. And like, I've had people say to me, "Oh, you help people that had a choice." And I was like, choice is so relative.
Yeah.
It's so undefined. And like, and I find is that, oh, this is my go too deep, is that if there's any kind of perceived, that there's some kind of perceived choice, people lose compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of our work, probably all of us all together, is to educate on what choice looks like, and the complexity, the time, like what you were saying, it's not an overnight. It's like this thing that takes a long time to develop, the perfect storm, all these vulnerabilities. Yeah, I mean, I feel like so much education needs to go into that part. Yes, I don't know if anyone. Yeah.
I would like to say something because Jamie Rosslin actually taught me years ago. I struggle with the idea of choice so much because I felt like I had put myself into all of these situations and, you know, all of those decisions you're talking about, Megan, those small circumstances that led up to, I was like, so much self-blame, so much shaming. I didn't qualify as a survivor. I wasn't a survivor. I had made all of these decisions myself. And Jamie said something to me and she said, you know, to say that you made a bad choice is to imply that there was a better choice to make. And so sometimes I'm just doing the best I can with what I have. And I don't always know what the other options are and what the other choices are, especially in another person's story. You know, I'm standing outside and I'm looking at another person and I'm saying they're making a bad decision, not knowing if there is even a better decision for them to make. And so that's always where I go when I think about the power and choice and what choices we're making.
Yes, I love that. And I think the same thing, like there is no true choice when you don't have other options, or when the other options are, you know, do I engage in prostitution, or do I end up homeless, or do my kids go hungry? That's not choice. That's not, by any means, that's not choice. And when you are in that state of survival, you are making the best choice out of a complete lack of like actual options.
Yeah.
I know. And then I'm sharing too much this time. But I know the stat of like women who end up in the commercial sex trade industry, it's like 75% have been sexually abused. Like a choice was made for them when they had no power as children. I mean, it's like it was already taken away when that entered their life.
Yep.
So it's like setting women up to have choice, whatever. All right, Brent or Erin, do you guys, I know because Erin, you're coming from like the mental health perspective, Brent, you're coming from like the law perspective. Do you guys have anything that you think we need to know that's different from the public perception for this conversation?
Well, I just, you know, coming from a lawyer perspective, you know, you have the law, right? And it's kind of black and white and that sort of thing. And honestly, you can know the law when it comes to human trafficking, when it comes to state and federal law, and actually have no idea about human trafficking. And because of these, the subtleties, the nuances, the factual scenarios, which are like Megan said, they can be so very different, but yet there's these patterns of coercion and vulnerability, and I do think the public has a tendency to look at, and like Stephanie said, even survivors can look at their own situations, say I had choice. Their perception is they had choice, but the fact of the matter is they didn't. And I think the subtle and long-term recruiting process, and the recruiting process really starts in a funny kind of way before they've ever met their trafficker, right? Because those vulnerabilities and the like start in, and that can be a long process, months, years, right? And so moving away from that public perception and the media portrayal of there's an incident, and then from that there's a point in time where it became really critical. And it's just great to hear Megan and Stephanie talk about this from their experience and research.
Yeah, and then from the mental health perspective a little bit, Kristin, I love that you're talking about our own perceptions. And like, I think that's a big piece of this, of a lot of times when we lack that compassion, I wonder, first of all, what is it about our own discomfort or our own holding of that keeps us from that compassionate approach? Again, the ways that we're getting in the way of us, so to speak, or our own histories or our own lenses, the way we see this world. And so I really wonder about that piece, because when I have the privilege of sitting with people and they often will share very vulnerably and authentically the bigger picture, this whole puzzle. And sometimes we see one piece of this puzzle and that looks very different. Like that puzzle might just look blue if you look at that one piece. But then when you see the whole picture, like, whoa, there's so much more. And I will hear about, okay, I'll be saying, whoa, vulnerability at age 5, at age 10, at age 15, and I'm like, wow, that happened. Wow, that happened. And you were talking about this component of sexual abuse, and I think we have seen that statistically. And also another one that I really learned about through just listening was this component of grief and loss. And I, at some point in my career, went, whoa, okay, we're talking about the connection here, this connection between sexual abuse and trafficking, but what about grief and loss? Every single person who's sitting in front of me, there's this huge component of grief and loss. And so that was something, another piece that I was just able to see, wow, there's another vulnerability here, and such a huge vulnerability in that. And so I think, again, I'm an advocate for it begins with us, it starts with us. You'll hear me say that again and again, and looking at, okay, what is it within me that's uncomfortable with this conversation or pushing back against this concept of choice or not choice or wherever we're landing. And so I really am like, okay, what about the mirror? What about the mirror? What about the mirror? And I would encourage all of us to look in the mirror again today, even if we already have.
Oh my gosh, girl. Because of you, I'm in counseling. Because you always want to look in the mirror. And I ended up going to counseling. Okay. I want to keep this going. So I feel like I'm just going to summarize, like being the entrance into the life is complex. It's the perfect storm. It usually involves a time period. It's the perfect storm of vulnerabilities. Maybe it has to do with pre-vulnerabilities from past trauma, grief, sexual abuse. So that usually that gets a person into trafficking. And now I kind of want to shift ourselves to what happens when a person is in the life. And before we do this, I want to do a quick poll about the life, because a lot of people make a lot of money off of the trafficking industry. So we're going to do this. How much money does sex trafficking make globally each year? And it's specifically sex trafficking. All right, we're going to end polling. The correct answer is $99 billion from sex trafficking. It's 150 billion from total trafficking, but sex trafficking makes 99 billion of it. Wow, I didn't show you the results. I can show you the results. I didn't do that last time. Okay, this is the correct answer. The audience chose 150 billion. The correct answer is 99 billion. And Stephanie, can you just really quick break that down compared to the NFL really quick?
I love the NFL, so I always use the NFL.
Yeah, for Jags fans here.
Jags fans, love it. But so the NFL generates roughly $8.1 billion per year. And that is like big business, right? I thought it was until I started to see these numbers. And so if you just look at sex trafficking and you take the $99 billion that they spend per year worldwide, and you just divide that by 365, it's $271 million being spent daily on the purchasing of people. And people are just not for sale. And so that's usually, we're just not for sale. So $271 million worldwide is incredibly insane.
And we wanted to paint this picture because once a person's in the life, people are making money and making a living off of the exploitation of people. So we wanted to there's a lot of money to be lost and gained for people. And it's part of the why traffickers, long story, but I wanted to paint that picture for you. So I want to have you guys share, once in the life, how do traffickers keep women in the life, and kind of like what is going on? I have that pointed to Stephanie and Stephanie and Erin first. and we can go to the discussion.
You want to start them off, Erin?
Sure, I can. It's like you can too if you want to. So yeah, I think what was being said just in terms of vulnerability and this perfect storm. So what I would say here from a psychological point of view is that frog example was just so, I mean, I couldn't have said it better really. And that's also happening internally. So much is happening psychologically. So traffickers are preying on these vulnerabilities and the physical, emotional needs of victims. Traffickers are also, though, using these behavioral principles like intermittent reinforcement and intermittent punishment. So this is back and forth and keeping people in this loop where there's never this known and there's never safety. And so I think that's really important to understand this, that this is keeping individuals in a constant state of fear. And so their body, their brain, everything in them is a constant fear response. And so from there, I mean, traffickers are also using tactics which are impacting not only the physical external, right? We think about, well, where's the bruise sometimes, or we think about the person sometimes because of media at times of that person who maybe has bruises, but really it's impacting the brain, the body, and the physiology of the individual. And so much is happening on like a neurological level and a psychological level as well. And so I think that's really important to note. And I think I'll end here with this is something that was profound for me and just like shook me to my core was there was a study done in California and they were looking at the brains of individuals, and they didn't know what brains they were looking at, but this individual that was studying the brain said, I've seen this brain before. Where have I seen this brain before? And it was the brain of a Holocaust survivor. And yet the brains that were being looked at, the impact of this brain was that of a survivor of sex trafficking. And so that would just have like a profound impact on like what we don't see that is happening in terms of the psychological and neurological impact is huge.
So it was like a physical impact on the body and the brain.
Absolutely.
Like changing.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, for me, and I think, and I love that you brought that up in the beginning, Megan, about just like the large set of like the small circumstances leading up to the, like all of the different things that had happened prior, because, when I was finally introduced to the life, when I was finally brought into the life, it was after everything in my world had just been torn down and fallen apart. My family had completely disowned me. So I was terrified, and I stayed in hotels. I only lived in hotels for about 2.5 years. And so I was living by a day-to-day basis. Every day was terrifying. Every day, I was worried about where I was going to go. And, and I have this person who is providing for me in that sense, right? Like when I don't have, he has, and he gives. And so I'm relying upon this, but I'm terrified if I leave. And what I end up doing is I end up, going from person to person, trying to find some type of sanctuary. And this particular, my trafficker would follow me there. And so I ran. And that's what was happening for me in the life. And every time he found me, it would get scarier and scarier because the violence would just get more and more, because I was more defiant, I was more angry, and I was searching for a way out. But I had absolutely and I know there's so many resources available. And the fact that we have advocates in the community that are able to share those resources with people who are in crisis and in the middle of the life is incredible, because, for me, I had no idea what a resource was. I didn't know that there was safety. I didn't know that there was like a detox facility. I didn't know about the women's center. I didn't know, about any of these things that are available. So for me, the only thing I have is my feet and just going forward and running. And, but it just continued to get worse and worse and worse until, for me, I ran into somebody who had gone into a facility, and it just ran into somebody. And this is what triggered my thoughts going forward and, and finding my way to that facility. But up until then, I had no idea what resources were. So really what was happening for me in the life was just terror. terror and just fear, and walking through each day hoping that something would change. But, you know, on top of that, drowning myself in drugs and alcohol, because that's the only way I know how to cope with all the things that are going on. And, you know, and that was a huge piece of the coercion that happened was, you know, when you don't have, I have, and I will give for this. And at that point, I'm so scared and I have nowhere to go that I have no other option but to do that. And so that's really what my experience in the life was like. And for a lot of the girls that were around me, because I was also not alone, there were several other girls either in the room with me or in the room next door, or, you know, at different hotels, I would always run into other girls. And so, you know, I kind of had them. And it was, that was really my experience, just terror and fear, and the force was all I knew.
Do you guys have anything else to add to that? So good. I was listening and I forgot the next question. Okay. So a lot of people, when they're watching this, they want to know, so you're in these hard situations where we're having trauma, but from the outside, like what are signs that someone is being trafficked? What can they look for? How do they know they're in the life? Megan, we can start with you for that one.
Yeah, so signs, I've done so much HT 101 training in my days. But I kind of want to split this into like a two-part response, particularly around like intervening or identifying somebody who's in the life or experiencing exploitation. So kind of going off what Stephanie just said, being in this constant state of terror and being completely unaware of who is a safe person to reach out to, or that safe people and resources even exist. So if you are just a concerned citizen, you may see things, and I'll touch on that here in a minute, but I would caution against approaching or attempting to intervene if you do not have training and support to do so. This can be so dangerous for both you and the victim. So if you are in a specific profession, such as a therapist or an attorney or a medical professional, like I feel like we could do an entire training just on identifying indicators that may present in one space, but won't necessarily present in another space, or that some indicators, like an attorney is not able to offer medical services. So making sure that they know what medical services are available, but not feeling like you have to be the person that provides those services if you're not equipped to do so. So when we're thinking about like identifying and intervening, I'll always love shifting this conversation a little bit from these oftentimes invisible chains, unless you are a trained professional, to like, well, what can we see as just somebody out and about at the grocery store or the library or just wherever we are in our community. And ultimately, what we can see is the demand side of things. We can see the consumption happening. And this really, particularly when we're talking about commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking specifically, the consumption of sexualized entertainment, you are likely consuming somebody who does not want to be there. So obviously we can't, this is one of the, like, as a self-proclaimed nerd, prevalence is something that we talk a lot about. How many people are experiencing exploitation? But we can't issue like a census and have people come check in at their local government office and check some boxes to give us that number. So we don't know. There's lots of different theories on how to estimate that. But what we do know from existing research is that most people in the commercial sex trade do not want to be there. And so whether an individual is paying for sex, like in a prostitution situation, they're going to a strip club, they're viewing pornography, that consumption is the consumption of somebody who is often there through force, fraud, and coercion. And that transaction or that consumption is what we can see and where we have the ability to intervene in so many ways as just community members. So as parents, as partners, as friends and colleagues, those are the spaces where we're going to see the actual exploitation of people playing out. And I think that that's our opportunity to step in those roles and say something. And oftentimes it's education and accountability, because folks sometimes don't know what they're contributing to, and they need somebody to hold them accountable. And I think, as Erin initially said, like, move folks into this space of like being open to learning something that they may not have known before, or they may have a belief system about that's very fixed, but it's based on limited information or skewed information. So yeah, I love shifting that conversation of like, how do we identify somebody broadly to like, how do we identify the actual exploitation that's occurring?
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna control. Brent, do you have anything? This is so good. Brent, do you want to say anything on this end?
It's kind of not fair to after.
Oh, you're cutting up.
And so hopefully, yep. Am I there?
Okay, you're back a little bit.
Hello.
You're back. You're good.
Am I back a little bit?
Yep.
Was gone for a while, then I came back. So I just was gonna. I was just gonna say it's not fair for you to ask me.
You disappeared, Brent. Dang it. Okay. I'm gonna keep us going. And I just want to speak really quick. Oh, sorry, Brent. You're welcome, Maria. To the demand side is why we also gave those numbers that the industry brings in $99 billion a year, is because all that's driven by demand. And if there's no supply, if there's no demand, then there'd be no supply. So we are also advocates of change in the demand side of the industry. Okay, we're just going to we're going to talk a little bit about exiting the life. But before, we have a question that another poll. Oh, has this been on the screen the whole time, y'all? Okay, polling question 3. Launch polling. Okay, what percentage of Rethreaded employees were trafficked in Duval County? 28%, 5%, or 100%? Okay, this is great. All right, we're gonna end it now. End polling, share results. So the audience chose 55%. The correct answer is 100%. 100% of women who are employed at Rethreaded were trafficked in our own county, in our own city, on our own streets. And we are sharing this one because I'm sure Megan and Brent, wherever you're at, people don't think it happens in their city. They think it happens far away, but it's happening right here. 100% of our women at Rethreaded have been exploited in our own city. So it's here, it's alive, it's well, it's a problem that we have to address. And that leads us right into getting out of the life. So many people think that, I don't even use the word, when women have an opportunity to leave the trade, that she can return to like just a normal life. Like that's all she needs to do is be removed from the situation. But most people don't understand that this is just like the start of the journey. So there's a stat that said if a woman doesn't have access to a new job and a new community, there's a 75% chance that she will be re-trafficked. So maybe Stephanie and Megan, you guys can first start off a little bit with what barriers are needed to overcome in leaving the life.
Oh man, I think there's layers. So again, I love theory, I love frameworks. And so Maslow's hierarchy of needs always comes to mind first and foremost. And thinking through like basic needs and where oftentimes, especially initially in anti-trafficking direct service work, folks were really coming in with kind of at the top of like, well, just go to therapy and like get a job and everything will be fixed, not understanding that basic daily needs have to be stable and consistent for a long period of time before folks can really start to engage with those higher, more complex pieces. So Erin kind of briefly touched on just the cycle of chaos that traffickers create. And I think with that comes this trauma bonding. So literally having to physically detox from the abusive situation and that environment. So you have those stress hormones and those bonding hormones happening together. And so there's that detox and that distance that needs to happen. And then oftentimes we see substance use disorders as well. And so those two things together, that is so hard to just break those bonds first and foremost. And then we come into like, again, like I said, the basic needs. So food, shelter, clothing, transportation, medical care, knowing that if you do have children or you have a family of origin that you're still connected with, knowing that they're going to be safe too when you leave that trafficker. But then, as you mentioned, employment. And again, that's how the Avery Center and Rethreaded came to be connected, because we run a job training program here in Colorado as well. And I think definitely that pulls from my own lived experience of exiting and applying for job after job after job after job, and being turned down either because I didn't have work history, I didn't have enough formal education, or I had a criminal record. Like there was at least one of those barriers every single time. And so when you think about commercial sexual exploitation broadly, it is a source of income. It's harmful, it's dangerous. Oftentimes you don't have control over your working conditions. You don't necessarily get to keep a majority, if any, of those earnings. However, they are meeting your basic financial needs of housing and food. And so if you cannot replace that income, it's no wonder that there's relapse back into the life. And so our job training program was absolutely born out of what I learned when I exited and the skill sets that I was pulling on and figuring out, and realizing I can teach this to other survivors as well. But also seeing that as the gap in our community, that there were no living wage, felon friendly, just entry level opportunities in our community. And so that's really where things have started at the Avery Center. But then when we expand just from jobs, we have to also look at those barriers. What are those barriers? And oftentimes it's the criminalization and being criminalized for your victimization. So I had 11 arrests on my record. They were all prostitution related. I was never, I think Stephanie, you said this too, like I didn't identify as a victim, but I was never like given victim status. Because in the courts, I was identified as the criminal. I actually have some of my court documents, one of my arrest records. On an arrest record, there's a line that police can write who the victims were in the crime that occurred. And on one of mine, it actually says that my victim was society. And so the irony of that situation of being a victim of systemic oppression and trafficking, but being told by these same systems that I was hurting my community with my choices. And so I think we have a lot of work to do around the criminalization of traumatized and vulnerable and exploited people. And I think like what Brent is doing is incredible. I've had an amazing attorney here help me with part of my own journey with getting my record sealed. But then also breaking down those stigmas that when somebody has a criminal record, it does not, it's this permanent stain kind of, and now being an employer thinking through how am I going to do things differently, and make sure that I'm not creating barriers for people exiting or coming from other forms of trauma too, that maybe have experienced criminalization. So I'll pound the drum of employment and barriers around that all day, because I'm super passionate about it, and super passionate about economic empowerment of survivors as a means of prevention for re-trafficking in the future.
Take it
You
away,
just broke my
Pam.
heart. It just broke my heart that somebody would say that to you. That's so incredible. Incredibly just ridiculous in what you're talking about, the criminalization of women who are experiencing, men who are experiencing, trafficking. And I mean, a plethora of other things, right? Like but so for me, and my passion is with housing. I believe that if I do not have a bed to sleep in, I am not able to go to a job interview. I am not able to go to counseling, therapy. If I remember when I first, took that half step out of the life, doing the rest of the process, I had a bed in detox, and it was the first bed I had for 10 days in a row in 2.5 years. And I was ready to do anything you would have me do, because I had not had the same place to sleep for that long in 2.5 years. And so I fully believe that housing is one of our biggest missing pieces. If we could have a place, and that's one of the biggest issues that I run into when working with women who are trying to make that transition out of the life and into that next journey, that next chapter of their journey. Where can you go? What's a safe place that you can go? What's a safe place that's not going to have this, these forced programs? I don't always need like a faith-based program. I don't always need like a 12-step program. That's not always the case. I need a bed. I need a bed for somebody to sleep in. I think housing is one of the biggest issues that we have in the city of Jacksonville, and I'm sure all over. But also, I meet with a lot of women who are dealing with probation. They are dealing with DCF. They are dealing with a drug court. They are dealing with mental illness. And there are just so many different things standing in their way. There's all these things. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to do this. And I can't do any of this without a place to live and without a job. I can't pay your court fines. I can't, I don't have a job that allows me to go and draw up at the courthouse. There's just so many things, and there's no help. And there's nobody there to help you navigate through it. There are, now that I know about the resources, there are a lot of resources that can help you, but, dealing with that on your own is so incredibly overwhelming. And then if we just top it all off with the trauma and the PTSD that I'm now dealing with as well, terrified that, this person is either going to find me or I'm going to need to go back, and dealing with all of the things. And for me, still struggling with the idea of choice and not identifying as a survivor at that point, because again, I also don't know what a survivor is, and I don't really know what human trafficking is. And I didn't really know what human trafficking was for quite some time. And didn't identify for quite some time. And so housing is my biggest. We need some beds. Yeah.
Erin, were you about to go?
I was just coming off mute to address the mental health needs of most
survivors.
survivors.
Go mental health
just
needs.
One step.
Oh yeah, sorry. I keep getting distracted. I keep listening, and then I'm like, oh yeah, there's another question. Okay, Erin, would you like to address the mental health needs?
Absolutely, Kristin. So the first is, as mental health professionals and anyone showing up, I think it's vital that we listen more, that we just pause and listen. I think there's also a ton of wisdom in addressing the barriers and knowing timing, but I think that starts with listening first. I think we sometimes come in with these assumptions, and if we would just take a step back and pause and listen, then we would see the barriers, and then from there we could know a little bit more, okay, where is this individual at, and within their journey and their process, and how do I come alongside of them wherever they're at to help them take that next step, and empower them to do so. So I think that's really big. And then in terms of like the mental health needs that I see, I think for most survivors, it's both simple and complex. And what I mean by that is that the simplicity is that sometimes I think we can think separate, right? I'm over here and they're over here. But that the simplicity is that just like all of us, there's a need to be attuned to be validated, to be seen, to be heard, to have a consistent, healthy attachment relationships within the context of a safe relationship. And I think that's across the board. And then I think the complexity comes in that the individuals need consistent and long-term care because of the long-term impact of trauma and the layers, that layered approach and the layers of trauma they've experienced. And so I think but I will say, I think it's equally important that we just not add services, but that the quality of care is looked at really closely. So for me, it's not about an additional group, an additional service, an additional appointment, but it's about the quality services provided by a team of people that are committed to the highest level of care. And so I think this is where I come back full circle to us doing our own work, and making sure that we're providing excellence in care, rather than just additional services.
So good. I think there was another question. Brent, can you kind of talk to us about your work and how you've seen the legal system? I mean, how does expungement work, and how have you seen it change a woman's trajectory? Oh, man. There you go.
Now?
We got you. We got you.
Okay.
Yep.
I have to talk really quick because it's going to cut off again. But wow.
Oh, man. Okay. I wish you all could hear Brent. Okay. I'm just going to tell the story real quick. Oh, are you back, Brent? It keeps cutting out.
I keep coming back and going out. If you can hear me, expungement is absolutely critical remedy. Thankfully, in Florida, we've got a great expungement law, which this month with the passage of some legislation. But that sort of prong effect, criminal or more exactly multi-prong, but the practical effects, the barriers to
Okay. I'll just give a little what I know about expungement. I wish Brent was here because I've seen it have an effect, and I just will speak super quick to what I've seen is that one of our women went through it. It was a 2-year process of working with Brent to go through the process. And it was like, and I would love for someone else to speak to this, but like I watched her go through it and she has to tell her story over and over again, over and over again. So I think that people think expungement is like a free write-off, I think from the outside. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so much work, so much resiliency and grit to get through the process of it. And she, like, why she's getting her record expunged, she can't get her license, she can't get her kids, she can't get access to housing. So she's taking the bus every day to Rethreaded for 2 freaking years. Why she's in this process. Like, and then once she gets her record expunged, it suddenly like opened up her world. She got her license, access to housing. I mean, it just like changed her world. It changed my world because I've got to just watch her world expand, and watch like the power of it. It was so good. I wish y'all could hear more from Brent. I'm sorry, Brent. I hope I'm doing you justice. All right. Does anyone have, we're like, it's 12:58, y'all. There's questions in here. So let's just take one question. All right. Maybe just close it with an actionable step. What is an actionable step? Like one actionable step that people can do. Because when you hear this, like people want to do something. So maybe you guys could give an actionable step. And if you want to speak about, please feel free. I mean, I'm just going to give props. You can always donate to the Avery Center, to Brent. I'm like blanking on the Justice Center for Restoration, Rethreaded. I just want you to know that we would love your support for all of us. We're all in the same game. So if you guys, do you want to start, Megan, with like one thing people can do with an actionable steps to take away?
Oh, geez. I thought I had time to like think of one thing.
Does anyone have one thing? Does anyone have one thing? I put Megan on the spot. Erin, go Erin. We'll come back to you, Megan.
Please,
We'll come back
I'll
to
give you a minute, Megan. Please, please, please do your own work. Look in the mirror. Please do your own work. Yeah.
I love that. So I think this may be still a little bit broader than one thing, but I think that we can all do one thing. And a lot of times, you know, people come to me after speaking and say like, I really want to get involved, but you know, I'm not a social worker, or I don't have this degree, or I don't have a background in nonprofit or whatever it is. And you don't need any of those things. There's so many ways that you can be preventing and responding to this issue. Just in your day-to-day life, and even beyond sex trafficking, thinking about labor trafficking. And this is an area where I'm learning right now and thinking about demand for cheap goods. And we're all complicit in wanting the cheapest item and not really thinking through, why is it so cheap? How are manufacturers able to keep costs this low? And the impact, just that ripple effect that has. So I think there's lots of things that we can do. If you have children of your own, or you're involved in children's lives, there's so many things. There's parallel movements. So we talked about sexual abuse and sexual assault being an indicator, like a risk factor for trafficking in the future. So if you are involved in domestic violence and interpersonal violence prevention, or sexual assault prevention work, those parallel movements absolutely tie into this as well. I could go on, but that's what I'll say.
So good. Stephanie?
Yeah, we need to have hard conversations. We need to talk about it. Everybody wants to dance around it. You know, pornography is not okay. It's not, like Megan was talking about earlier, like you are consuming a person who more than likely does not want to be there. So we need to talk about it. We need to talk to our children and let them know, because it's not, if out of sight, out of mind, right? Like out of sight, out of mind. I'm not seeing it. I'm not talking about it. I don't need to know about it. And these are our children. These are our children. These are our mothers. These are our fathers, our daughters, our brothers, sisters. Like we need to talk about it. So having those hard conversations is what I would leave with.
Okay. And I just want to say thank you for all our panelists. That was so good. I wish we had more than an hour. I feel like I learned so much and it was so good. Just really quick, when we send out the follow-up email, there'll be links to the Avery Center, to Brent's organization, to Rethreaded. Rethreaded is celebrating 10 years, July 31st, which I can't believe. It's amazing. And we're having a party. So if you want to come to our birthday party, go to our Facebook. We just got donated a $30,000 match for our 10th birthday. So anything you match or buy will be matched. Anything you donate or buy will be matched. So it's, go do that. go to be our birthday party, go shop, and advocate, be who you're created to be, and do your work. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you attendees for all the great questions. And we will send out answers to your questions that you asked on like the following week. We'll send an email out with all the questions. People ask good kind of complex questions, and I was like, we have 1 minute. So we're just gonna hold it. Okay, I think that is it. So attendees, you're free. All right. Panelists, I'm going to need your help on some of these questions. Can you guys read the Q&A?
Yes,
Okay.
I can from my end.
Okay, good. Because there's just some of them that like, and then Megan, when it says contact information, what do you want us to share? Do you want us to share like do you want us to share like the general email or you? Okay.
Yeah, info@theaverycenter.org is the best place to go.
All right.
And there was several questions. There was one specific in the chat that I definitely can give some information to. And also, will we be saving Kristin the information, their information, to be able to get back to them? It was an Olivia Smith, I believe, that asked a question.
Yes, we will. We'll send out the recording. Oh, I got to stop recording. Guys, I am